Welcome, everyone, to Poets in Conversation. I'm Phyllis Klein, and here with me today, I have Robert Perry and Joel Katz, two friends of mine who happen to live down the block pretty much. We have in the past seen each other quite a bit at live readings. In the last couple of years, as you know, as you can imagine, we've been on Zoom quite a bit. Now we're having this reading today. So I'm really excited to welcome both of them and welcome everyone else who's here. What we're going to be hearing about tonight is Dutch poetry, Dutch Poetry Press. And we're going to hear about Joel's book that came out in 2020, Erase, Endure. I will read my poem, which is it's going to come out in a journal. That's why I'm reading it online. So it's written about a news story. I haven't been writing so much about the news lately, and you can maybe guess the reason. I can't deal with writing about it anymore. It's too much. But this poem, this was one of those news stories that really prompted me to write something, and it's called Landing. In a sky of great sorrows, where even the air has come under assault, into this world flies a man in a small plane over Florida. The pilot just passed out at the controls. The plane notices its navigator has gone missing, which means it's going down. The man moves into the pilot's seat, knows enough to radio the control tower to say he has no idea where they are or how to fly anything. This is a bad situation, bad as a building eating bombs in a war zone. Bad as the back of a head with a gun speaking to it, or a path of destruction carrying an avalanche of snow or rocks or mud. The man knows he must safely land this plane, must save the other passenger, the pilot, and himself. First, they have to be located by ground control. Then an airport located, ready to embrace the tires on wheels that will meet the runway like a lover. This is when a voice arrives on the radio. I see you. I have you. I'm with you. Every day, so many things to go wrong, so many ways to despair, but not this day. Who can say if the man woke up the day before with a dream about rescue, that he could fall into a back pocket of air, find a safety net of instructions, that another man could change his course forever? Thank you. That's a true story. All right, well, now I'm going to introduce Joel. I'm sorry, I mean Robert. Here's what I'm going to say about Robert. Robert Perry is a poet and translator, artist, and book designer, and a publisher of poetry and art books through Dutch Poet Press that he founded in 2015. The press has published The Comfort of Potatoes by poet Janice Dabney in 2015. Yet Anders, Something Else, a book of translations with Joel Thomas Katz and Ingmar Heitze, and Saskia Stewhauer in 2017. And Virte, okay, that's enough of that. Free Range, I can't do the Dutch. Another translation with Joel Thomas Katz and the author Saskia Stewhauer in 2019. And you can find more at Robert's website, and we'll put that up in the chat. Now, what Robert doesn't say in this introduction is that he is quite a wonderful artist. Some of his artwork can be seen on the Dutch Poetry Press website, and some of it's right here on the cover of Joel's book. And a question I have is, where can we see more? So now I'm going to introduce Robert, or let Robert talk.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, to answer the question, thank you very much, Phyllis. And both speaking for both Joel and I, we really appreciate this opportunity to be in conversation and read our work, and including the translation work as well as our own poetry. And so as far as the artwork goes, some of it can be seen on at the Dutch Poet Press website. But also, if you email me, I can send you PDFs and things like that. And also, you can send me your email address, and I send out periodic email newsletters, and that include my artwork as well. And I also combine the artwork with the poetry, which I've done in print form, but also just creating my own PDFs that I'm happy to share with people. So, and so what I was going to start reading, is that proceed with the reading, Phyllis? Yeah, great. So Dutch Poet Press was, I should say quick first, that Dutch Poet Press was founded with the idea of my bringing all my different endeavors under one roof. And so now I have two roofs. I have Dutch Poet Press, and also I design poetry and art books for people, and that's the Robert Perry Book Design. So, and that has a website as well that's in the chat. So with that, the first book that I published, and I chose Dutch Poet Press for very personal reasons, and I'll talk further about that later when I read some of my poetry. And the poem of the Dutch poet that I was thinking about when I was trying to figure out what I was going to call my press. So that's later. But the first thing I wanted to do was show you, I don't have a screen share, but this is the first book that Joel and I did together, was Eat Saunders, Something Else. And I just love having both of the languages together, and you can see there's a correspondence and that takes place. And in the same inside, there's Dutch on one side and English on the other. And it's really amazing that it's definitely a synchronistic universe. I call it a lattice of coincidence, which is not my original, I didn't invent that term, but when I published Janice's book and was at a book fair and had a table set up, here comes Joel out of the blue, fresh from Amsterdam with two books that he wanted to translate, and he wanted to teach himself Dutch. And I said, well, you've come to the right place. This would be perfect for Dutch Poet Press. So it just happens that way. And that's the way the world happens. You open your doors and things rush in. And so after that, about a month passed, and we went to Palo Alto Cafe and met weekly and translated Ingmar Heitse, a poet, city poet of Utrecht, and Saskia Stehauer, a poet from Amsterdam. And this is the result, Eat Saunders, Something Else. So I'll read one poem that we translated from Ingmar, and then one from Saskia. And then I'll read some poems from the Freya Outloop, the Free Range. So this is called Utrecht for Beginners. And this is a poem that's on the wall, printed on the wall in Utrecht. Utrecht for Beginners by Ingmar Heitze. Don't look for a year or so to get a good sense of this city. Anyone seeking the heart of the matter can dig until he disappears into a hole of 20 centuries. You can seek out books heavy as monastery bricks, or climb a spiral staircase until the puzzle lies at your feet. Yet this doesn't give a better view. Choose a good evening. Walk along the canals and look how the light disappears in the houses. Put your hands on a wall then. Here, the oldest stone has it right. And this is a poem by Saskia Stehauer called Footsteps in the Street. Footsteps in the street. The child who is born here knows that weather comes from the north. The child who is born here is equipped for great deeds. The child who is born here can taste whether a dish is well prepared, even though his grandmas can't cook. If there is snow, the child will tell the others what to do before the harvest can fail. He will intervene and stake the plants. The child who is born here doesn't miss a full moon. The child who is born here will have the key to every door, will care for little messages, and every afternoon, the child will look at the trees in the garden, and he will keep each leaf to be seen for the children who are born here. The child who is born here feels the grief of a dead animal, holds out a white sheet. He chooses the color of his message and knows that bread exists by the grace of butter. When he sleeps, his mother's voice resounds in his dreams. When he plays, he feels how young his legs are. When he eats, the warmth of the country slides down his throat, and he hears the music of the fields. The child born here will leave something behind, will be at home. And you can sense from Saskia's poetry that she's interested in landscape and the land and so forth. And she's been branded an eco poet. And you could tell by the title with free range. David, could you bring up the cover of Free Range? There's so Freya Outloop, free range, means the very same thing in Dutch as it does in English, which is that it means, ironically, just a bigger cage. And so here's the first poem in the book, 1,000 Ways to be Human. We poked out the eyes of a dove, hung him on a pole to deter his kind. We shot down buffalo until it was winter on the plains. We visited places until they faded and began to give up color. We forgot how a tree grows. Can I be born here if the sand blows in the wrong direction and the beetles are lost? Do I want to listen to a circle of people who don't know what they should do with the remains? A throat got slit. The scar is visible. And then I'll read another. From beyond the farm field, when we discovered a tall something within us, we knew we had to go beyond the language. On the bark of the tree in the garden, we swept up the slivers, put them together with the glue of our attention. We left the village with regret in our eyes and dirt under our nails because we were expected. Ran for our lives with a briefcase and a birdcage as strong as the weakest link, held each other at the ankle because we can't go lower than the ground. Always stayed vigilant because your nose sleeps too. All those dreams about a long life, well, it's about arriving somewhere where someone plucks out of the crowd. Help us to get there. Help us to climb up the head to see the thoughts. And another one, ahead of the prow. The boats stay still until the island has found them. In their dreams, the rowers design the land. Feel how their toes touch the sand. See how the turtle turns itself around. In their head, the view of the city awakens. They see where a group of birds branches off, how the waves separate their foam, heaps of clouds betray the island. They stand tall so the wind can blow through them, as there is nothing left that gets in their way. And then in response to this experience of translating these poems, actually, this was a three-way transcontinental translation with Saskia online and by email. And so we wrote our field notes, which are some essays and some poetry that went along with it. So this was our response that in what we learned. And Joel wrote an essay, I wrote an essay, and we had also an interview with Saskia, which we recorded and transcribed. And Joel wrote a poem, which I have the honor of reading, for a new year. We needed a new kind of Bible, not so much a testament as a ball of twine to be unraveled, opened, something linear, yet undirected, something beyond a ringtone and finger swipe, to focus our attention, something as vaporous as a cloud, yet casting a shadow on the very ground we walk on, while we consider how many haircuts it takes to feather a pillow, or how the storm drain at the corner of Putz and Montana in Cincinnati is the final resting place for misplaced car keys, how it's a portal for errands, raccoons, how during autumn rains its grillwork resembles a coffee filter, soggy and rank with leaves, how that corner with no school crossing guard, the storm drain is an arbiter of flow. Is this where the twine will lead us? And will we find something to believe in? Thank you, Joel. And then my poem is called Alyssum, and I thought of the California landscape, which I grew up in. So I thought it was, we've heard from the Netherlands and from Cincinnati, and And this is from California. So a listen and a kind of thank you and tribute for the book. A listen, sway in the coastal wind, at peace in sunlight, fragrant on the Big Sur Road, in a Carmel Valley garden, at my feet, guiding me all the way to the sea cliffs, the trail down to the beach and blue horizon before sky and ocean disappear into mountains of mist. Ragged rock soften, cypress witness the weather, the history I carry home. Carry those rolling, crashing waves over the hills, across the San Joaquin, up the foothills to the sawtooth peaks of Ebbets Pass, to glittering meadows, to the stark face, stone jaw of the Sierras, likely to come up in conversation, campfire, coffee shop, car trip, can't help myself, the sweet words about the dark-eyed junco before breakfast, flow like rivers, all that I wish to share about Alyssum in the late afternoon when I finish reading Saskia's poems, grateful again for what Joel found at Perdue, the bookstore where he found his book, the books of Saskia and Engmar. Grateful again for what Joel found at Perdue and brought to my attention, again for this book and my partners in translation and the rest. Thank you. And so one of the things that Phyllis asked me to read was one of my poems on the spot. David, could you bring up the book cover of Poems on the Spot? So I don't have a picture of it, but my partner Jessica's mother, my mother-in-law, Lois, gave me her mother's typewriter, which is a beautiful Royalite typewriter that from the 1940s. And I got the notion to bring this to a book fair and request poems, have people request poems and I would write them. And so in one afternoon, I took requests from people and it took about 20 minutes to write each poem more or less. And then a letterpress printer friend of mine, Mike Day, suggested that we assign it to his class at Foothill. And so we assigned the book with these 12 poems. And the instructions were to set the poems in type and do an illustration to go with the poem. And so you can see the front, in this image, you can see the front of the typewriter. And so, and the first request I had was from Dana. And I said, well, what do you want, Dana? And he said, I want a poem from my wife. And he said to me, well, and then I said, well, what is she interested in? And his reply was, cats are her muse. And I said, well, tell me more. And he said, yes, she's always loved cats. They're the center of her universe. And she has this idea of her death that she be, rather than be devoured by cancer or something like that, she said, I would prefer to be devoured by a panther. That's what he told me. So I said, I think I can write a poem about that. I think that's good material. So this is what I wrote. And and so for Ingrid from Dana. Muse of her universe, muse of her childhood, queen of her enchanted kingdom. She lives in the eye of night, walks on the paws of her heart, inside the yawning mouth of day, waiting in the light for the panther's shadow to appear. And so Dana gave this poem to Ingrid, and Ingrid had it framed, and she has it on the table beside her bed. So that's a fun part of something that's not Dutch Poet Press. And then also, Phyllis asked that we read a poem from a favorite poet of ours. And so when I was thinking about putting my press together, I was trying to think of the title for it, the name of it. And I kept coming back to Dutch poet. And the Dutch poet I had in mind was Remco Kampert. And Remco Kampert was a post-war poet. He was in a group called the 50ers. And it's, I guess the nearest something analogous is the Beat Poets. And he was interested in jazz and so on, and was responding to the catastrophe of World War II and occupation and so on. And so, and Remco Kampert his work reminds me of William Carlos Williams. So here's his poem called, sorry, I'm going through papers here. In a Mist, which is comes from the title of a composition by the clarinetist Vic Beiderbecke. In a Mist, and I did the translation. In a mist, in the house that was not mine, with the woman who was once mine, the piano that nobody could play, and the bill that nobody could pay. House of mist, woman of mist, words of mist, love of mist, in a mist. The night was never so black, the earth never so uncertain. Behind my ribs is stuck a shard of grief, who made the roads impassable. Yes, I know it well. You say, I did it, the hater of roads, with a hand full of wounded love, a head full of biting pain, a heart full of blood drying black. In a mist, I have walked for many years now, in a mist of words and gestures, in a mist of pain and uncertainty. One day I will disappear in a mist of no feeling. Come, let's drink a lot of whiskey, out of a glass or out of the bottle, as long as it reaches our stomachs. Let's go to the train tracks on the dike and listen to the rails where danger comes our way. Hear our dangerous ears banging on the nervous metal. The night was never so black. And so this inspired me to write a poem and this one I wrote in the Netherlands.
So Robert,
Oh yeah,
if this could be your last one, would that be
sure
okay?
thing.
Okay.
Van der Halslaan, 16. Up in the attic, I hear my nickname called from downstairs. Children play in the summer. A sailor stands on the carpet. Cops chase the robber. I return to the table by a large window, the blank page before me. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Thanks so much, Robert. That was a
Sure.
wonderful reading. And we got a really nice, lovely variety of different things that you've done. Yeah. And Saskia and your book, and then some translations of some other Dutch poets. So why don't we bring Joel? Joel, do you want to join us?
Sure.
Yeah, and then if everyone else would stay muted, and if anybody has any questions or comments, put them in the chat. And we'll just take a little break now before Joel has his reading. So, oh, that was so rich. I don't know where to even start. Yeah, to just ask you a few questions um, about what you were reading.
Sure. I
Yeah,
see a
so
lot of questions in the chat.
well,
Wonderful.
yeah, well, actually,
Go ahead.
yeah, it's a lot of it, I think, is my just writing down lines. So I can tell you the lines that I wrote that really just struck me as I was hearing you read A Whole of 20 Centuries. I think that was from one of the poets you translated. Weather Comes from the North. That was Saskia, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Bread exists by the grace of butter. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then I say I love these lines. Uh, so um, yeah. So Joel, I don't know if there's anything you want to add or say while we're having this little interlude. Um,
Well, there's one um, feature of Saskia's poetry, and you see it in the Bread Exists by the Grace of Butter.
mhm,
Uh, there are certain cultural phrases in Dutch, and they are called spreekwoord or speech words. Something maybe akin to Ben Franklin's entries in Poor Richard's Almanac, A Stitch in Time Saves Nine, or something that reflects the culture that you're in the middle of. And Saskia has this uncanny way of dropping a contemporary little parable phrase into her poems. And well, you're not sure if that was, from the 1700s or if it's just came out of her head or something like that. But one of hers that sticks in my mind is, let's see if I can remember it. You need to, it's the one about autumn and winter, Robert.
You need to go through autumn to get to winter or to understand winter.
Something like that, yeah.
mhm,
So her poetry really reflects upon
Mm.
what she sees in her environment, in her world, and what what concerns her ultimately.
yeah, and we
Yeah.
got that in that one of the poems you read was pretty dark. I think it was one of the first ones you read of hers, Robert. But
Yeah.
yeah, so we get it. Yeah.
There's that part of it. And
Mhm.
there's the tradition in the Netherlands is that of course it comes from the 17th century with proverbs and people writing their own proverbs, and those you found in small little paintings, and even in handwork that people did. They would crochet them, but also they're in paintings, and they would show up on tiles and that kind of thing. So it's very interesting to see somebody working in the 21st century who's using those phrases. So it's like what Joe was saying. There's kind of like a modern parable or a modern homily, and it even seeps into the way the style of her language. You notice that these couplets that she writes in, and yeah, so it's interesting. So the rawness and the darkness is there, but at the same time, you feel as if there's lessons here. And one things that we were asking her is, well, you're providing something like a parable or a homily where there's a message, there's a lesson to be learned. And she wanted to make clear that she doesn't try to tell people something. She tries to show people something in that. So she gives you that which you can use your imagination, and poetry helps that, and also that something to reflect on and then live with and in that way. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I had this fantasy that maybe she could join us, but I know it's probably quite late where she is. at night. But I hope she gets to see the recording of our.
Yeah, we will share it with her, definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
I was thinking about all that we can talk about later about the just the translation and how you're working together. I know a lot of people translate in more than one person groups together to do translations, and so that's a really wonderful and rich topic for us to continue to talk about. So before we go to Robert, I mean to Joel, I keep, I will do that. It's like transposing. Like, anyway, so before we go to Joel, I just wanted to say your idea of the writing on the typewriter and making that into a book, it's just so close to my heart, because I believe so strongly in conversation and how
Mhm.
poetry is a conversation. And actually, one of the people here today, Perry Longo, a really dear friend of mine and my mentor in poetry therapy, and I have done a lot with poetic conversation. So that was partly why I wanted you to read that, and so we could let
Oh,
people know about
wonderful.
that
Yeah.
too. Yeah. So,
Yes.
well, good. Well, so let's why don't we move on? I'm going to introduce Joel, um, and uh, and then we'll hear some more delicious poetry. Joel Thomas Katz is a poet and translator who published his collection of poems, Erase Endure, with Dutch Poet Press in 2020, and a chapbook, Away, with Magpie Press, Mayapple Press in 2008. His poems have appeared in Sandhill Review, uh, the Montserrat Review, Disquieting Muses Quarterly Spillway, and Red Wheelbarrow. He participates in an ongoing collaboration, as we know, translating and publishing Dutch poetry into English with Robert Perry through Dutch Poetry Press. And then we have some ways to reach Joel, which we'll put up in the chat. So what Joel didn't tell me or put into his introduction is that a few things actually that I found out by looking at his website. One is that he studied Hebrew, French, and Russian. So this guy knows a lot of languages. And also he has this amazing blog called Poem Pairs. Again, a kind of a conversation between two different poets and different poems, looking at comparisons of poems based on line length and varying translations by different translators. So lots of talent going on with these two. Okay. All right. I'm going to turn it over to you now, Joel.
Thank you very much, Phyllis. That was a great introduction.
You're welcome.
So one thing that Phyllis asked Robert and me to try and do is, yeah, we're going to read our own poetry, but could we pick a poem by somebody else that intrigued us and maybe think about why it was that it intrigued us? So I have a poem by the American poet Stanley Plumly, Plumly, and the poem is called Wrong Side of the River. I watched you on the wrong side of the river, waving. You were trying to tell me something. You used both hands and sort of ran back and forth as if to say, look behind you, look out behind you. I wanted to wave back, but you began shouting, and I didn't want you to think I understood. So I did nothing but stand still, thinking that's what to do on the wrong side of the river. After a while, you did too. We stood like that for a long time. Then I raised a hand as if to be called on, and you raised a hand as if to the same question. So what intrigues me about this poem is that the words are very clear and very simple. And a lot of the words, maybe most of the words, are one-syllable words. And yet the poem, for all its clarity in that respect, remains very mysterious for me. And no matter how often I go back to it, the mystery still stays there. I mean, what didn't the speaker want the other person to know, right? That they understood. And what's the kind of relationship between these two people, and why can't they just, I don't know, say what's on their minds? And so this poem is a favorite of mine. Wrong Side of the River by Stanley Plumley.
Another conversation.
Another conversation to be had. Tune in next week when. Anyway, moving on to my own book of poems, Erase, Endure. That was published through Dutch Poet Press, and Robert Perry designed the cover and the look and feel of the entire book and all that. And the publication date turned out to be not the greatest date, because it was March 2020. And so the idea of giving live poetry readings where people would come and hear the stuff faded away quite quickly. Besides which, people were staying away from each other. So it was a double and triple medical pandemical whammy. But as we're doing today, we used Zoom to share the poetry, and more people came from various places around the world that might have showed up at Kepler's or, someplace like that. So the book is called Erase, Endure, and it's in 3 sections. The Erase section embodies the following notions: smallness, decrease, erasure. And then the Endure section explores notions of presence, sturdiness, and increase. And then there's a 3rd section that I'll say more about later. So here are some excerpts from each of the sections of Erase, Endure. There are 2 epigraphs at the beginning of the book. This one is attributed to the American artist Robert Rauschenberg. Thinning and thickening are both part of a painting. And then this quote by the American poet Dorothea Lasky. I know the body is a corpse and text, but is also a possibility. So here's the opening poem of the book. It's called First Halloween After 9/11. They come to the door dressed as firemen, police, rescue workers with hard hats. They ring the bell and stand there. No one chants trick or treat. To those without special costume, we ask, who are you? And they answer, smiling, the passengers. All that candy we bought for handouts now so useless. Instead, we find ourselves taking their hands, telling them, thank you, thank you. Here's a poem which is what's called the prose poem, very short little paragraphs. And this is called First Thing. My friend had a mild case of glaucoma in both eyes. The clinic recently performed surgery on one of them. Today, she told me how she goes outside first thing in the morning to enjoy the sky. She holds one eye shut, then the other, alternating. She likes the way the sky becomes yellow, blue, yellow, blue. So in a section about smallness and decrease and some notion of erasure, this next poem is an erasure. Wave Books in Seattle has a website, and they used to have a section of it where they'd have various texts from authors that are in public domain. And you could choose a text and you could choose to erase certain words or white out certain words to maybe get to some underlying message or whatever. So this is an erasure of somebody's novel. Novel was called Happiness in Marriage. And if we can show this on the screen, you'll be able to see. So the right-hand poem is the one I'm going to read, but the left-hand poem is also an erasure. So taking a text and being choosy about what subset of words appear in the text to get to, like the sculptor gets to the underlying image that's hidden within the stone. So this is Happiness and Marriage. All this judgment is simply for and against, waiting to decide. Just be still and think through the other side of things. So there's some excerpts from the erased section. So here's the endure section, and you'll notice immediately that the lines are a lot longer and takes more breath to get through the poem. And it's in this poem that a helicopter makes its appearance. Night. This is the swirl that night offers. This is the feta you crumble over your roasted sweet potatoes. This is the young wine you prefer to a glass of aged 7 years. These are the hours that confound and cling to your skin like the salt of an absent lover. The moon, the yard with its fence leaning in spots, rotting in others. A neighbor's dog yipping its brusque arias. The redwood towering over the Japanese maple like the memory of your father's arm around your shoulders until that fleeting weight recedes. Then there's just the dull rumble of a medevac copter above. Here is the noun, there is the verb, all in a night's work. Someone is busy explaining it, and the language laced with crickets. So the next poem from the endure section is a response to a phrase from the American poet Mary Ruefle. Mary Ruefle said, and I quote, "Pity the slow passage from the soul to the esophagus." And I kind of wondered about what that might mean. And here's the poem, response to Mary Ruefle. Long way down, chants the crew of Her Majesty's frigate, lowering the mainsail. Long way down, sings the hard hat on the nest of beams atop the unfinished skyscraper as he opens his lunch pail. Long way down, mumbles the crisis specialist before addressing the woman on the ledge through a bullhorn. Long way down, croons the janitor as he lowers the flag in front of the junior high. Long way down, prays the astronaut before entering the Earth's atmosphere. Long way down, sings the penny dropped into the well. This next poem from the endure section is one of my favorites because it makes an inquiry into my name. or my names, and it's called Namesakes. So I wondered about my namesake and opened a Bible to the book of Joel, minor prophet, just 3 chapters, and found locusts, a plague of them, laying waste the vines, splintering fig trees and stripping the bark, covering the moon with a rusty gauze. And nobody was standing around with hands on hips, shaking their heads in tight circles of annoyance, going, locusts, locusts, can you believe it? No, they were abject and repentant. And Joel declared, sound the trumpet, solemnize a fast, proclaim an assembly and cry out to the Lord. I couldn't be that Joel. I'd rather be my other namesake, Yosef in Hebrew, Joseph, braggart to his brothers, dreamer, sold to a passing caravan and thrown into prison from which Pharaoh would pluck him to decode the nightmarish 7 fat cows and 7 lean cows. And Joseph goes on to save the citizens from 7 years of famine. Now that's a namesake. Then there's me with a mortgage, a dented car and a failed lawn, someone who can mutter helpful facts like the opposite faces of dice total to 7. When people argue, it sounds better in Italian. A tree stripped of its bark is still a tree and needs to turn for solace to the ancient Joel who said, so rend your heart and not your garments. So we're at the final section of Erase Endure, and there is an interplay between the true contrasting impulses of erasure and endurance. And this section was written in response to my father's death in 2018 at the age of 96. So this is the two poem warning, right? First Father's Day without. A friend asks, which is heavier, a pound of feathers or a pound of lead, or the mourner's black ribbon you wore and tore at the cemetery and which now hangs from a corkboard in your man cage. In morning's brightening light, each bird caw the syllable of some future poem, clouds as cryptic as his handwritten scrawls. A friend says, it's time to shuffle and re-deal. A friend asks, if you start out from point A on a train traveling 80 miles an hour, how long will it take before your father appears in a dream? Next available dream. In the clearing, a circle of 10 foxes facing inward, waiting for someone to happen. For now, I'm folding the dough into a loaf I might fathom. And then the final poem is called New Life. In a Jewish custom called shloshim, male mourners refrain from shaving during the 30 days after the death of a parent or spouse. The unkempt look signals the mourner's status, suggesting that he is focusing on the deceased rather than on his own appearance. On day 31 after my dad's funeral, I walk into a traditional barber shop in downtown Bozeman, Montana, run by 2 30-somethings in baseball caps. Kyle, brim forward, and Cody, brim backward and with a hefty beard. After preliminary thinning with an electric shaver, Cody leans me back in the chair, places a warm towel over my face to soften the skin, then applies the heated lather. Next, an attentive straight razor shave, followed by a cool towel to reinstate skin moisture. The whole procedure takes 40 minutes. Cody then sits me up and turns the chair toward the mirror. Running my fingers along the lower face, I say, smooth as a baby's tush. Yup, says Kyle, it's like starting a new life. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Joel. That was really wonderful. I really appreciate your reading very much. And why don't we bring Robert back and ask everybody to unmute so we can have a conversation. I guess so. I didn't really see that many comments in the chat, which means everybody was really paying attention and focusing while you were both reading. So does anyone have any comments or questions you want to ask, or I can certainly get us started. It's hearing a pin drop, yeah.
Phyllis,
Go ahead.
Phyllis, you get us started. No, I'm waiting for you.
You're waiting for me. Okay.
Yeah.
That's what you wanted to say. Okay. Well, I've got lots of things to ask about. So why don't we start? Well, maybe let's talk a little bit about Joel, some of the poems you read, since that just happened most recently, and talk a little bit about your book, which I certainly can relate to, having a book come out, right? I think ours came out pretty much almost exactly the same time. Yeah. So I was so intrigued by the title and the way that you wove in your father's death in there. So I was curious to know, when you were putting the book together, was it your intention to do it that way with the 3 sections, or did that evolve as you went along?
That evolved. I mean, I know I had clusters of poems that were about, I don't know, lessening or diminution, and then I had poems that were a lot more expansive. So that kind of gave me the notion of erase and endure.
Mm-hmm.
But then, you know, around the time that my father died, or time leading up to it and after, what suggested itself was those 2 impulses interact with each other,
Right.
and provide some kind of framework, mysterious as it is, for processing what's going on in the world, or what has just gone on in the world, and the death of a parent and things like that. So it all, after the fact, that it seemed to work together, but I didn't sit down with you know, a designer's pencil and a T-square and work it all out ahead of time. It was pretty organic, and it suggested itself as I went along.
Which is really, really brilliant. It's so much more complex doing it that way. And I was just thinking about, all of that, the idea of the erasure, which is so much. And I don't know how you came, is that an interest of yours, that erasure poems, or
well, and along the way, it became an interest.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a silly question, because it's obvious that you're really good at it. And how did you get interested in that? Like, was it?
Well, it solves one creative problem, in that you don't have to come up with new word. I mean, in this sense, right? Translation is marvelous because somebody else has created the words. I mean, they've done all the heavy lifting.
Sneaky, yeah.
but for Robert and me, it's kind of like, so how do we share this, or how do we convey this to readers in another language? I don't know. It's not that erasure or translation is easier. It's a different kind of challenge, right. And it's still a challenge that you work with and you shape and you go back over, And hopefully you're somewhat satisfied by the result.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how you, when you're looking at poems to use for erasure, how you pick them. The one about the marriage, it just seemed so perfect. Especially in a book about beginnings and endings, right? And impermanence.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, so shall we talk some? Oh, so Jessica says a wonderful variety of poems and backstories. Yes, thank you for that comment. And let's talk about translation because that's such a part of what the two of you are doing and doing it together. And I love the story about the serendipity of how that came about. So even though I've heard you talk about this, Robert, I still wasn't exactly clear when you. So forgive me if you're repeating this. When you started Dutch Poetry Press, were you thinking about translating books from Dutch at that point, or was it more like a general press and you just thought of calling it Dutch Poetry Press?
I was just thinking of Dutch Poet Press, and it just seemed it felt right to me. Um, I tried all these different ideas and made designs along with that and so forth, and tried and I think that the idea of translating was there, but wasn't figuring prominently in it. It just seemed like what I did was I looked at the sweep of my life, and one of the very recurring themes was being interested in Dutch art and culture and language and so forth. So I was a art history major. Well, for one thing, my cousin married a Dutchman here in California, and then they moved back. So there was always at holiday time, there was cheeses that were sent over. My dad got boxes of cigars and so forth. And then I went to when I went to college, I majored in art history. So I got very interested in Dutch art and in Mondrian in particular. And then I went to Europe and visited my cousin, and we really got reunited and became friends, and we had very much the same interest in art and that kind of thing. And then when I got back, I to do for my junior junior and senior year at Cal, I decided to take, they have a Dutch studies program there. So I took the language and I wanted to go on in art history and 20th century modern art. And Mondrian was my hero. And so then I wanted to learn more. I wanted to learn the language and learn the culture and so forth. And so I got to learn the language there, and then went back and lived in Europe for a while, in Holland. And then I've just that theme has carried me through all the way on several visits and so forth.
Yeah.
So it was just like a kind of like a culmination of that. And then it was just serendipity that Joel, I said, oh yeah, translation, we should do that. That's perfect. And it just
amazing
from then on. And and I have to give a shout out to our poetry group in Palo Alto, Waverly Riders, because which I joined in around the year 2000. And it's just been, for me, it's been the gift that keeps on giving. I mean, to have a very welcoming place to go and read and non-judgmental and so forth. And then as things were happening, I was thinking of ways I could put my poems into print in some ways, or with my art in some particular way. So I took the book arts and letterpress class at Foothill. And then also I was involved in communications in my day job at the Packard Children's Hospital. And my boss said, well, why don't you learn, Creative Suite? Why don't you learn InDesign, Photoshop, and Illustrator? And right at that time, Waverly was going to publish their
Oh, right. I
their
remember now.
commemorative, the 25th
Yeah.
anniversary book, the commemorative volume. And
Mhm.
so I joined the committee and became the designer of record for that.
Oh, that's so
And then
fascinating. Yeah.
I was on the committee with Palmer, Penny, and
I think, is
Sharon
April
Olson.
still, is
And
April
Sharon
here?
was going to publish her book, The Long Night of Flying, through 16 Rivers Press, which is a cooperative press. And she chose me as her designer. And so
That's
then,
how it started.
yeah, it
Yeah.
started from there. And then I designed Esther Kamkar's books, and then Janice's
here we
book,
are.
and it's continued to this
Keeps
day.
going.
Mirna, where are
And
you?
yeah, we have
And Mirna's book, and then
Well,
Joel, so you want to
I
give,
want to,
give
yeah, I want
Mirna
to
a
give a
plug?
shout out for Myrna's book. So I want to make sure that you can see the whole thing. How Memories Insist.
Anna Herschel, How Memories and
Myrna Herschel, and she's here with us. I don't know.
Beautiful cover.
Beautiful cover. This is a photograph that Myrna took right in her neighborhood. And we're actually going to do a reading in the new year, probably. Yeah. So yeah, who else is here from Waverly? I know April is here. Mary Marcia's here. Who else? Myrna. And Jane is here. Everybody's very quiet today. Okay. All right. Well, so do you want to talk more about the translation, the two of you, and how that works? I mean, um, it's so fascinating to me. We talked about it a little bit beforehand, and you were saying that each person has a different uh, style, a different sensibility. So how do you work? How do you do it? You come together with your different points of view, or do you work on it together collaboratively? Like, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Robert is fond of saying that, yeah, we really slaved over the translations, and we're still talking to each other.
Exactly. I think we said you were the odd couple. Yeah, that was one thing we had mentioned. Yeah.
We're definitely different personalities and different approaches, but that makes for a complementary relationship. I think it really helps. I think Joel has the real interest in that yearning burns more brightly with Joel, and he's the one that just goes right to the translation, and then generally he brings the translation to me, and then we meet, and then we take a look at things, and then go from there. We're like two yeshiva bochers, we're just two study partners, and each brings their own point of view to it, and we argue it and debate and go over and try all these different approaches and so forth. We do a lot of erasing and enduring. We endure each other.
That's great.
There's a good, I don't want to use a new world term like synergy or anything like that, but there's something working there.
Mary. So Mary Marcia, do you want to say anything? You put in the chat, Robert and Joel are very good collaborators. And Joel has been co-editor for a number of Waverly's Fresh Hot Bread issues, which is the publication that is that still happening now, or what's going on with that?
Well, I hope to get something back, but we have been on hiatus for this thing, and we've done some Zooming one thing. But I always appreciated Joel's input. He was a very good editor. And, helped me a lot. I
Awesome.
think, a lot. And I can imagine it helps to have a collaboration situation to keep you going, or when one sags, the other perks up. There's a
Mhm.
and I think it's a meeting in the mind where an energy is exchanged. I think it is there something to that, you think? That do you feel that each other's minds a little bit in the work?
Well, I think it helps that we're both poets. So
Well,
we love poetry, we love language. So that's helpful. And somebody put in the chat, how did Joel get interested in Dutch? Why Dutch? And
That was
I'd
me.
like to know
That
that
was
too.
Terry.
All the way from the beginning, Robert, I wanted to know how. Do you have a relative or something that got you interested in Dutch literature? And Phyllis asked the question, and that's a wonderful story. So I wondered about Joel as well.
Mhm.
So it all, well, one version of the official story is that I was traveling with my father through Europe, and we were, the itinerary had Spain and Lisbon, Portugal and Amsterdam. And midway through the trip, there was a medical situation that came up with my eyes, and I had to leave the trip and fly back immediately to the United States, and the next day have, the ophthalmologist give me a laser zap in one of the eyes.
Wow.
So that was good, but there's always good news and bad news. I was done out of a flamenco demo in Seville and a fado evening in Lisbon, and anything that happened in Amsterdam, of course, which my father told me, oh, we went in the canal boats and there was a dinner on the boat. So I said to myself, well, I need to get back to Amsterdam, because I kind of got, through forces beyond me, I kind of got cheated out of that.
Mhm.
And so, I don't know, 2 or 3 years later, I took a 2-week trip there, and I was just really entranced with hearing the language. I mean, it seemed like this strange but possibly close cousin of English, or it was English, but like if you're listening underwater, so there's some, and I had studied linguistics in graduate school, and I think that impulse of language learning and all that took over, and plus my love of bookstores. So I went to a bookstore in an Amsterdam suburb, and I was looking for thin poetry books, right, that maybe I would dip into and try to understand and learn the language and all that. So I think that's part of the genesis of
Wow.
how I came into this picture of Dutch poetry.
It's wonderful. Great story. There was a line that I did write that I loved from one of the poems you read, Joel. I don't know if it had anything to do with the sound of the language, of Dutch language or not, but I wrote it down. The language of crickets.
Yeah, I love that too.
Fascinating line. And I just wondered if you kind of answered it a little bit. You said you became fascinated with the sound of the language. So,
well, it didn't. Okay, not. Some people have described Dutch because of certain sounds in it as a throat condition. There's a lot of, and all these weird vowels that have no
Definitely not.
counterparts in English, but not too much clicking going on. But I guess in some sense, the language did start clicking with me. So that.
And
And
that's
the rest
Joel's,
is history.
that's Joel's orientation. His approach to language and poetry is through music. He's a musician as well. So that's part of it. So that
Right.
line really resonates, that it's crickets. In Holland, it's frogs, because of the water, and it's known as Kikkerland, frogland.
Oh, really? Yeah,
Um,
I just don't know very much at
Moderately
all.
affectionate, it's not,
Yeah.
it's a little bit of a,
Well, so it's really fun to read the poems because it gives you a window into a little bit of a window into the culture too.
Yeah,
oh,
absolutely.
And
enormous.
that's
Yeah,
just
right
such
in.
a gift, to learn more, through poetry. Um,
I mean, you don't often go into a bookstore here and see a shelf on translations from the Dutch, you know.
yeah,
It's really
right.
unique and
Hmm.
wonderful, and I'm interested in
It,
learning more.
I try to
Yeah.
provide the, when people ask that, I mean, it's a niche, I can say it's a niche market, but that makes it too narrow because you get inside the niche. It's a little bit like a Twilight Zone episode, where the guy went through the wall and then he was in this totally other dimension. So it's just vast. I mean, it just opens up this whole,
Mhm.
think of just like what Ingmar said. What's the line? The small hole into 20 centuries.
Yes.
And that's your niche market. And think of all the things that happen there in just that little, yeah.
Mhm.
So and it all resonates through those centuries. So it's
Mhm.
represented there. And in another poem, he talks about this little alley. It's called the Steeg, Steeg, and the Swan Steeg, and all it is this narrow alley. Just like their stairs are more narrow and their stairs are steeper. It's written into code that it be, that way because
Wow.
it's, the canal. Anyway, it just, see what I'm just being my usual stream of consciousness self here. But that's in the nature of it. It's familiar. Okay, we've all been down an alleyway, but this one is more narrow and it's all brick. And yeah, so it's that kind of thing. It's very interesting. Yeah,
Mhm.
and
So
I have
another
been
thing,
to other countries besides Holland, but
that's the one that sounds like it's closest to your heart, though. Yeah.
so, and
Yeah.
it's been wonderful that Joel feels the same way.
Mm.
It's like, okay.
What a great, yeah, what a great uh, series of events that, that you could develop a love of yours into something really this wonderful. And the other thing, there were a few other things we talked about in relation to Saskia's poetry that I'm trying to recall. One of them is the leaps, and I think you had a word for that, but she starts in one place and then,
Yeah,
she just goes off, especially in the new one, the free range.
right,
It's just like
right.
she'll be talking about something, and then the next line she's like sort of like in outer space
I
somewhere.
love that. I
Right.
love that.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
it's a stream of consciousness,
Hmm.
and it has like jump cuts.
Right, that's it. Yeah.
And so it will, if you think of it in cinematic terms, and you obviously read from, point A to point B, the top to
Hmm.
bottom. And as you're going through, it jumps from one scene to another and they're connected, but it really calls on you to use your poetic imagination. And you mentioned that it's dreamlike, but
Hmm.
it's real life, what she's describing. I mean, it's as if, she's the invisible observer, witness observer going through, and she picks up on this and picks up on that, and she can just time travel
Right.
or go from one thing to the
Right.
next, one scene to
Mhm.
the next, and observe and just make this very acute, very precise observation, and then go next and next and next, and then the
Right.
sum of it, you have to read it again and really
And again,
and reflect it and so forth, and that's okay. I mean,
Yes.
you can
Yes.
so it's a bit Yeah, so I hope that's helpful. Yeah.
Uh-huh. I think
Um,
it is. Yeah.
so
Yeah. And
um,
actually reminds me a little bit of Joel's poem, the quote for Mary Ruefle, which is it's not there, it's not, well, there are leaps down, yeah,
right,
but it's that idea of one thing leading to the next. And I was going to ask you about
right.
that, Joel. Like,
Sometimes.
oh, go ahead, Mary. Did you want to say something,
Where did
Mary
Joel
Marcia?
go?
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot the mute. Sorry. But
Oh, okay.
what I wanted to say was that sometimes the leaps could be mysterious for the poet too. I think that's all right. You know, it's just mystery in poetry is
Yeah.
timeless in a sense. Some time
Mhm.
line, somebody else finds something or synchronicity happens. Anyway,
Beautiful.
Well, there's this,
very interesting reading.
yeah, there's this famous quote from Robert Frost: "No surprise for the writer, no surprise for
Prize
the
for the
reader."
reader.
Right?
Yeah.
And I mean, what attracts me to poetry is you don't, it's best done if you just let whatever is going to happen happen. I mean, if you have your last line already planned and you're trying to get to that, it's not going to be as good as you say something and then you go, well, what might that mean? Or, I just said that, but now I'm thinking about this, or
Mhm.
and it's a mind that's actively trying to make connections and that isn't afraid of being in that fluid kind of atmosphere where the poem teaches you something you didn't know, or you didn't think you know.
Mhm.
So
Right. Just like the way that you did your book, which, which really wove in some things that you might not have been thinking about putting in there
yeah, for
until
sure.
it sort of seemed like it was the right thing to do. And I think that's the best way to
Yeah.
write poetry. So I was going to ask you about that, in response to the Mary Ruefle poem line. Um, when you came up with those long ways down, did you have more? Like, I was really curious about, how you decided to use the ones that you did, and the flags, and there were some other, the well, and yeah, but just the
Well, so it
imagery
turns
there.
out I didn't write 30 of them and then say, oh,
Yeah, yeah.
this subset is the best or anything like that. But it all started from what in the world might Mary Ruefle have meant by, quote, "pity the slow passage from the soul to the esophagus." I
Yeah,
mean, so it's this travel down.
right.
And then the phrase "long way down" kind of
Yeah.
came to me,
Mhm.
and things ricocheted from that.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah,
And
I
that was
love
a
I really
wonderful
like it.
poem. I loved it.
Thank
Mhm.
you.
Yeah. Well, so does anyone else have, let's see if there's any other questions or comments. Put it in the chat if you feel like you don't want to say anything. Oh, Mirna, did you want to say something? Or?
Yeah, I just have a few remarks. First
Yes.
of all, thank you. This was a great reading and a great discussion, obviously. Secondly, I'm much more familiar, obviously, with Robert, your stuff than I am, and your stories behind your poetry and all that, than I am with Joel. So before I say something about Joel's stuff, I just wanted to say that to me, absolutely the favorite translation that you did is the one, I don't remember the title, unfortunately, but it goes, "This is the child, and this is the child, and this is the child, and this, and
Yeah.
this and that." It just is, it's incredible. It involves the naivete of the same child and the things that children do, and takes us really someplace else by the end. And so just so that no one would even have a notion that it's simplistic to translate. Personally, it seems to me that That's right. I tried to translate a few. It is exactly these types of poems that are absolutely the most difficult, because you have very little elbow room to translate within. You know, the story is tight and the words are sparse. And, you know, how do you nail this? But anyway, so to go to your book, Joe, starting from the title. This is the greatest title I can think of, I mean, that you thought of, because Erase, Endure it took me today, but I knew of the title even before, right away to all sorts of thoughts. Erase, how much can you erase? Should you erase? What about the morality of erasures? If you erase too much, have you given up some parts of you and the other people on whose behalf you are actually speaking, whether you meant to or not? On the flip coin, endure, how much can a person or anything or anybody endure? How good is it to endure? Is it always actually a good thing? Is it opposed to rebelliousness, perhaps? Because endure has a certain passivity, for me, from my understanding, down underneath. So I'm just saying, this is a phenomenal title. I don't know, how did you come to make your selections for both parts? But, and also what is great about this title, that ultimately it rings the bell of hope, for me anyway, because you erase and then you endure in the end, right? So it has this hope bell ringing. Anyway, I just wanted to bring this up because
Beautiful.
it fascinates me.
Mm.
The rest of it about translation, you guys don't know, or you do know, how fortunate you are, because there are two of you to keep each other honest. Well, you know.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness,
It's
because
true.
I've tried to translate a few, not from Dutch, obviously from Croatian, but I have nobody to get angry at, or else it can be me all the time. And I can indulge myself, but it's dangerous. And there is nobody, when I said to keep me honest, in a sense of what, when you translate, how do you prioritize the music, the meaning, the literalness of the things, the freedoms that you take, right? And you two, I'm sure, groped with those issues plenty. But when you have each other, you bounce off each other and put things on two scales. I wish so.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
if
it's
I were
ideal to do
envious,
it as a pair.
I'm sorry.
You're so right. It's very helpful to do it as a pair,
Yes.
because I mean, I can learn so much from what Joel does, and I hope that he can learn from me. But it takes, you can try out so many different options and so forth, and then and see where you agree and disagree, and see and yeah, it moves things along in interesting ways. Yeah, it's helpful.
Yeah, well, so yeah, Joel, do you want to say anything more? And then we're gonna have we're gonna close.
Okay,
with two
I'm
poems
just
from-
looking at the Hollywood squares here, and I think Jessica has a comment.
Oh, really? Oh, I
Yes,
didn't notice.
no, yes, no.
No, okay.
All right.
Oh, yeah, we did forget to ask people to raise their hands, so I have to remember that for next time. But yeah, good to notice. So does anyone else have a comment, or before we finish up? Joel, do you want to say anything more? Or
Less is more.
all right. Well, so why don't we? I don't see any hands raised or anyone else who would like to speak. And thanks so much, everyone, for all your comments and what a great discussion. And so Joel and Robert both each brought a short poem to read for us to end with. So and we didn't really decide who was going to go first. So I'm going to let the two of you decide. We'll see how your process is.
Argumentative.
Yeah,
All
you can
right.
see us in action.
Yeah. Okay.
We're not supposed to argue in front of company, you know. But,
You want to go first,
Okay.
Robert, or what?
no, you go ahead because it's like at the menu. I brought 3 things to read, and so I'm trying to think of what to
Which
read.
one?
Okay.
Go ahead.
So this was occasioned by a hike up the Stanford Dish path. So in the hills above Stanford, there's a hiking trail, and there's a radio telescope that are there, more than one actually.
Mhm.
And there's a field where cows occasionally appear and wild turkeys and stuff like that. So this was in the middle of the pandemic. This is being mindful of the cows. And the title of this is a prose poem. The title of it is Kine, K-I-N-E, which is an archaic form of the plural cows. Kine. Every other cow swats her tail at the daytime moon. The rest of them maintain a grating silence. Or are they asleep while standing, eyes open? In their dreams, they perceive whether the days are getting shorter or longer. Some of the cows notice a circle of nearby humans who are closing and opening their mouths. Then the odd-numbered cows decide to lie down and smother some grass. The even-numbered cows wonder if their multiple teats are superior to whatever humans have. The daytime moon scoots over a bit. Half the cows are thinking of something else to do. They conclude that odd and even apply only to cows, not to humans.
Thank
Very
you.
nice. Thank you, Joel.
Mhm.
Thank you. Beautiful. This is an 2 old poems that I made into one, and I have into one poem, which I want to give a shout out to, a thank you to the Tuesday Poets who recently, a small group of friends who workshop and enjoy each other's company and poetry. And one of them is here representing April. So hi, April, thank you for being here. So this is a possible solution to from all the suggestions that were given. So I made the 2 poems into one poem, and so hopefully it addresses a few of the concerns. So we'll see. But anyway, here goes. The title comes from a fragment by Sappho. That's the title of a wonderful book of translation of her poetry by Anne Carson, the poet. If not winter. If not winter. Upon castle walls worn down by war, a distant flute plays against the sky. 3 souls set upon the heath, weathering a storm, they tread on unsteady ground, consumed by an ocean of tears, a furious heaven bending the king low in torment, blind as the wind awakening him to a dream of his many deeds, to the full severity of compassion. His days now an endless night, spent crouching for the light. Old bones may learn to take the bite of battles won or lost, but there is no defense against the madness that prevents spring from showing her face when the earth is nothing but dust, fires smoldering, wailing heard over the fallen. If not joy, winter.
Well, thank you both. And
Thank you.
thanks. You're very welcome. It's been really wonderful having you both. And I want to say next month, the last Saturday of September, I'm going to have Connie Post and Janine Serto. So two wonderful poets, also wonderful poets. So hope to see you, as many of you as can make it then. And until then, stay well and keep in touch. And thanks very much for coming.